These days, the discourse around video games often concerns hardcore gaming, or deep dive into the mechanics of the game, underlying maths, and sometimes also the cultural implications of what's inside those games. However, what's missing in talking about video games these days is pure joy of gaming. Luckily, 2025, at least for me, has a great start because after the awesome Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, now we get Split Fiction, a new game by Hazelight, which is the studio behind A Way Out and It Takes Two. This game is a creation of a madman, because how else would you call someone who puts dozens of different mechanics into a single game and at the same time takes you on the wildest co-op roller coaster I've ever played? I loved every minute I spent with this game, and now, let me tell you why. This is Split Fiction. In order to do this properly, first let me quickly introduce you to Hazelight. The studio behind Split Fiction already has 2 great co-op games released, but the core of the team began their success even earlier with Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons that was made by Starbreeze. The guy spearheading the whole endeavor is Josef Fares, who some of you might know thanks to this.
Okay, can you swear here? Can you swear? Okay. Fuck the Oscars, you know? Fuck the Oscars! Fuck you!
A Way Out, a story of 2 guys escaping from prison, released in 2018 and sold over 9 million copies as reported in June last year. It Takes Two, telling the story of a troubled couple, released in 2021 and sold over 20 million copies as reported in October last year. Another game from Fares and company was absolutely not unexpected, and when the announcement came at the Game Awards 2024, everyone, me included, got pretty excited. Before we talk about the gameplay, let's focus on the story for just a little while. Split Fiction is about the journey of 2 aspiring writers, Mio and Zoe, who have not yet been published, but they have been given a chance to do something with Raider Publishing, and that something is the beginning of their journey, and I don't want to tell you too much, because what happens next basically jumpstarts everything, and it's pretty fun to watch. Mio is a sci-fi writer and Zoe writes fantasy stories. Due to certain plot elements happening, the worlds of both women collide and we get to experience the futuristic, cyberpunky sci-fi worlds that were conceived by Mio's mind, and we also get to visit the fantasy lands full of dragons, quirky animals, and magic that Zoe came up with. On the story and world-building side of things, this game presents its own world and populates it with ideas and references to pop culture, movies, video games, even anime, and it's done in a very seamless manner. Sometimes the references are subtle, like the falling pillars you need to traverse that are very similar to the scene in the Mines of Moria in Lord of the Rings, but sometimes you'll hear characters referencing or sometimes straight up quoting movies, like Scarface. And sometimes you'll come across not so subtle nods to the Sailor Moon, for example, when the new look for the character is presented whilst entering a new story. The developers also don't shy away from referencing their own work. You can find a pet store with a very characteristic looking elephant as part of its logo, and you will recognize Cutie if you played It Takes Two, and this will probably bring you PTSD. There's also an ad directly referencing the name It Takes Two, and further on in the game you can come across Vincent and Leo from A Way Out, but I'll leave the details of that encounter to you. It doesn't mean though that Split Fiction is built only on those references and that it's funny and fun only when you have those nods. Luckily, the writers at Hazelight did a good job with their own content, and it is fun. If you liked Dr. Hakim in It Takes Two, then coming across Monkey King in one of the stories should put a big smile on your face, even though his role is considerably smaller. There's also a pretty characteristic band of villains which the writers introduce across the chapters. They build certain expectations and then turn some things around as to their origins or features for comedic effect. The only villain that I found a bit too flat was the final villain of the game, who felt a bit too obvious. Even though, gameplay-wise, the whole boss fight was absolutely great. As with It Takes Two, the story is supposed to be a feel-good story, an uplifting one, and it definitely is. At the same time, it tackles serious issues and trauma, going pretty deep into what made the characters who they are. The game is about the power of friendship, about caring for your loved ones, and about dealing with your past in different ways. I guess some people could say it's a bit naive, maybe the way some things are delivered is a bit predictable, but I actually enjoyed it. And joy for me was the most important factor while playing this game, because I felt something that I felt when I was playing last year's Astrobot: pure excitement. Pure fun. And sure, you can have video games where you beat bosses, where you spend dozens of hours to figure out their mechanics and how to beat them. Then you have grim RPGs with their moral dilemmas that you have to go through, and they're great. But what's missing these days often is just pure fun. And it's here. When it comes to gameplay itself, Split Fiction builds on the premise that It Takes Two successfully introduced, meaning you get to play a level during which you get a certain gadget or a mechanic, and you traverse through that map by cooperating with your friend. While It Takes Two generally took a premise of having a single set of mechanics per level, Split Fiction decided to go all in, and your tools not only develop throughout the chapter, but you also get to visit optional side stories that introduce a completely different set of mechanics and challenges. These side stories range from being competitive kitesurfing or snowboard riding. Sometimes they're unusually presented short adventures full of humor. Oftentimes you get to experience a completely new mechanic that won't be used ever again throughout the whole game, just because developers felt it was fun to do it like this. They even made their own version of Fall Guys in order to tell a story about a dentist. And in one of the levels you get to play as pigs, one of which has the power of elongating itself, and the other farts to fly. Like, really, who comes up with those things? Okay, fine, I know who, it's this guy, and because of his crazy ideas, this game is crazy fun to play. By structuring gameplay this way, Hazelight made sure that they remove the potential feeling of boredom that might arise from using the same tools for too long. So, for example, if you play a bigger chapter that's set in the sci-fi setting, you suddenly encounter 3 side stories from Zoe's perspective, meaning you get in the fantasy world. There's also additional levels that don't fit into this concept, but I won't get into details as, again, spoilers that I want to avoid. It just feels like the studio put a lot of time into getting the pacing right to make sure you always have something new and surprising to do, and I don't think that by the end of the game they ran out of ideas. They actually nailed it. The finale especially is a testament to countless meetings and ideas that Hazelight people had, and no one was saying no during those meetings. And I loved that. So in a way, Hazelight didn't make just one game. They made dozens of games because they had to make sure that every feature, every system, every mechanic is spot on within the constraints of the level they put it in. I imagine that a lot of resources were put into making this happen, but seeing how successful sales-wise was It Takes Two, I think EA is giving Hazelight the benefit of the doubt regarding their creative ideas. Now, I feel like I should definitely address the difficulty level of the game. Sure, it's nowhere near From Software's games, but at the same time, no one expects it to be, because the target audience for Hazelight's co-op games is completely different. Keeping that in mind, I think Split Fiction is a bit more difficult than It Takes Two, but it's still manageable. There are moments within this game when things get more difficult, and your co-op partner, especially if they don't play games that often, might get a bit frustrated, but it's nothing that a little patience cannot solve. Also, with the sheer number of different mechanics happening at different points of the game, some people might get a bit confused, but here's another compliment for the developers. The controls for each of the mechanics in this game revolve around the same set of buttons, so it feels natural to use anything that gets thrown your way, no matter what it is. However, if you got into big arguments with your partner while playing It Takes Two, then get ready for part 2 of that experience. Or take some Zen classes, because every once in a while, this might be necessary. For any of you wondering, you can play that game either as a couch co-op, meaning 2 players on the same screen, or you can play it online. This game, just like It Takes Two, utilizes the Friends Pass, so that means only one of you needs to own the copy of the game in order to play it. Now, one thing that's important to mention is that there might be issues when you play the online co-op. I played with a friend of mine who lives a few hundred kilometers away from my place, and for like 99% of the time everything was running smoothly. No connection issues, no desync problems, all good. However, there are moments in the game when players interact with the same object, for example, when rowing a boat. This means that both characters are in the same physical object in the game and they both influence that object by their actions. And sometimes there were tiny desyncs that made us less precise in our gameplay, and thus we had to repeat certain sections of the game in order to get it right, meaning we crashed into something. The problem might arise if you don't have a stable connection, but since we both played on PC, I wonder how much of that might be a hardware issue. For example, if the game is lagging for one of the players because it's dropping frames, does the other player see that as well and gets influenced by it because he uses the same object as player 1? I don't really have a definitive answer since I didn't have access to the console version, and that would eliminate the hardware issue and only leave the potential connection problems on the table, but I feel like it was important to note that, even if it was a really rare instance. Now, even though the visuals are not the best you could get out there today, the game's art style absolutely delivers. The artists behind the looks of each level did a great job, and level designers who created all these places are absolutely worth commending because it's just fun to traverse those locations. Everything is uplifted with music that corresponds really well with what you see on the screen, shifting moods and pumping you up when necessary. As for the optimization on PC, I didn't run into any issues, but I do have a pretty powerful PC with 64 gigs of RAM, RTX 4090, and AMD's 7800X3D CPU. I played it on the highest settings and I had a completely stable frame rate. However, my friend mentioned that he wasn't really happy with the optimization on his PC and he had to lower the settings to medium to play it comfortably. We finished Split Fiction in about 13 hours, but you can easily double that time because obviously you can play it as the other character who has a completely new set of mechanics to play with. I believe there's even more replayability in this game because it's just so fun to actually play it, not only getting to know the story. For the moment, I think I have to say that Split Fiction has become my ultimate co-op experience because I like Hazelight's approach to games, and with this one, they elevated it even higher. So yeah, if you allow the creative mad mind to run free and just trust that there is a thought behind every crazy concept, you will get a game like Split Fiction, which is
simply lovely.
I thoroughly enjoy games like The Witcher or Kingdom Come Deliverance. I spent over 1,500 hours in the Battlefield series, I played hundreds of hours of World of Warcraft, but I believe that we don't always need the complicated games, or games that provide us with moral dilemmas in an RPG that takes 200 hours to complete. And we definitely do not need every game to be a live service game. Sometimes all that is required is to have a game that makes you smile and enjoy yourself. A game like Split Fiction that, at least for me, reached deep down inside back into times when games were just enormously exciting to play as a kid. I believe that Split Fiction is the absolute best out of the 3 games that Hazelight did. It's something that I know I will replay again, so if you have a partner that you can play it with, or a friend or a colleague, or anyone, your grandma for example, then yes, I can absolutely recommend it as a day one purchase. Why? Because it elevates the already tried formula, it tells a meaningful story, creating its own unique narrative while often referencing pop culture that doesn't feel like a forced fan service, but instead a love letter to other works of fiction. You can replay it at least once and still find something fresh in it. The sheer number of different mechanics and locations the game has throughout its gameplay will keep you entertained all the time, and even though some boss fights can be a bit challenging for a casual player, it's nothing you and your partner can't handle. If you're playing on PC, be aware of potential day one optimization issues, and remember that there might be singular elements during online play in which connection desyncs can make your gameplay a bit more difficult. All in all, it's absolutely worth your time. In the spirit of transparency, I need to tell you that I got my early review copy from EA for free, but I already promised my fiancé we'll be playing it together, so on the day of release, which is the 6th of March, I'll be buying my own PS5 copy. Because yes, I enjoy this game a lot. If you got to the end of the video, I appreciate that a lot, and I hope you consider staying for longer, because we have some cool things coming in the next few weeks. Oh, and let me know in the comments if you plan on playing Split Fiction. If so, I hope you have a great time. I know I did. Thank you so much for watching again. Goodbye.
Really? What?